and welcome to Framing the Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Sid Parulkar. This is season 2, episode 2, and very excited to be speaking to Matthw Barnes, who is a principal consultant working for Praecur Consulting Services. Matthew is a clinical research professional, has been in the drug development industry for almost 3 decades. I was fortunate have worked with Matt while at UCB Biosciences and later on at one of the sponsors where he was supporting from a CRO perspective. His extensive experience managing multi-functional teams, large clinical studies, end-to-end program management. He's been on both sides of the aisle, working at CROs and also at sponsors, which is really exciting because the topic of our discussion is really going to be around how CROs have evolved, what are we looking at in terms of site support, in terms of enrollment, so many other factors we'll be talking about. But just going back to his experience, I think he's held some senior roles with pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies in the past, as well as CROs. Recently, he was in a very senior position at Virpax Pharmaceuticals, and he's pretty much led the operational preclinical programs and the drug manufacturing piece as well. So very well integrated, lots of experience. We are hoping to engage him today, not only to just learn more about his career, but also touch base on some of the key challenges that we're seeing in the industry and find probably solutions as to how we can work through this. So tag along and let's dive right in and learn from Matt's experience.
Hey, Matt, thank you so much for joining and taking the time to be part of this podcast. I know we have rescheduled this a couple of times, so I truly appreciate you taking the time and being flexible with your schedule. But again, as I mentioned in the introduction, you come with tons of experience in the industry, almost 3 decades. But it would be good for listeners on this podcast to hear about how your career trajectory has been and how you have evolved over a period of time.
Yeah, so thanks, Sid. First of all, I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. This is a real pleasure. And my trajectory has been, I've been in the business for 30 years. I really started in CROs, but that was really more boots on the ground, doing data management, clinical monitoring. And then as I was moving more into project management, I spent like decades on the sponsor side, a small biotech. And then after doing that for like, I don't know, 15 something years, I went back to CROs for several years, working as a senior director in an oncology group. But then after that, I decided I really wanted to get back to my biotech side. And I spent the next few years at a preclinical biotech, which I'd not done previously, but it was a great experience. And following that, I decided to start my own consulting business. I think that, I have a lot of different experiences and it really has helped me understand the importance of things. And so my consulting business is Praecur Consulting Services. And the thing we really focus on, what we offer, it's really about shortening timelines for sponsors, the overall development timelines. And you do this through high quality, high touch solutions. So this isn't just coming in and managing something. This is about like coaching teams to understand quality by design approach, doing proactive vendor engagement, and really understanding how to partner effectively with vendors and outsourcing partners to get to your study goals as quickly as possible.
That's great, Matt. And I mentioned it in the introduction as well, but just for listeners listening in, you have kind of worked together at UCB Biosciences where we kind of knew each other, running into each other at the hallways. And then eventually when you were at the sponsors, I was at Blueprints Medicine. It was exciting to see you on the other side. So you've been on both sides of the aisle. I think what would be really interesting to understand is like, what are the differences that you've seen on, trying to be a service provider versus trying to be a sponsor, trying to drive it. Any learnings or anything that you can share that would help the audience understand like why, again, both sides of the aisle would love to know like how can CROs do better and how can sponsors do better, just from a lens that you had across these 2 aisles.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway, and this maybe sounds a little bit banal, but it's really about communication and the intent to partner effectively. And I hear people talk about this a lot, but on the sponsor side, my experience was there would be frustration when study goals weren't getting met. And the tendency was to push that back on the CRO, saying like, oh, I don't think they know what they're doing. I'm frustrated. My team is, not executing, and you kind of didn't know how to fix it. You felt you didn't have control over it. But on the CRO side, it's sort of the opposite. Oh, the sponsor's not being clear about what they want. We are operating exactly to the contract as it is written. If they wanted something else, we need to update the contract. And of course, the sponsors are like, please don't give me another change order. I can't deal with that. So there's sort of like misaligned incentives. And it is very helpful having been on both sides that when you hear, like when I was on the biotech side and I hear a CRO telling me this, like I know what they're thinking, like I know where they're coming from. And just that being able to engage with them and understand their path helps forge the correct solution. And it also just builds that partnership, right? Because they're not feeling attacked.
Yeah, and that's very well said because I've spent some time working at CROs before. Majority of my career has been in the sponsor setting, and I completely agree. There is always this lack of synergies between two different teams with expectations set and with what the deliverables are. And you're absolutely right. CROs are stretched. They try to build resourcing based on the contract. And every time there's a change in a scope, CROs need to quickly adapt to those changes. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. That's where I think some of the sponsors get frustrated. But again, it has to be well balanced between both teams. As I said, communication is the key, which is where I think sponsors don't, many times, I've seen this very, very often that they don't share a lot of information with CROs. They just want CROs to operate within the framework of the protocol and the scope, where downstream impacts in terms of the next strategy that's planned in terms of where this study is going. Do we need an interim cut? We haven't built it in the protocol, but now all of a sudden we feel, okay, our regulatory strategy is requiring us to do an interim cut that we could submit to the FDA and probably get an approval or conditional approval. And then that changes the scope. So CROs need to quickly pivot, which is where, tell me your thoughts on like the partnership, this preferred partner model that CROs come up with. Are they able to do justice to the sponsor's needs if a team is assigned to them?
So that's a great question. And Sid, I'm currently in the process of writing an article I'm planning to publish in Applied Clinical Trials. I've interviewed over 20 different professionals. We've talked about their experiences with different CRO models or outsourcing models, not just CRO, using contractors, consultants, whatever. And there's a shift right now to people really wanting to move towards hybrid models and away from preferred provider. And there are still some folks using preferred provider models, to be fair. But in general, the feedback I got was on the operational team side, there was lower satisfaction with the preferred provider model. And the perception was that there was an increased time spent on the sponsor side dealing with out of scopes and change orders, and that they felt like the teams were disincentivized to perform because it was a sure thing. If you have a preferred provider, the CRO knows they're going to get the work. And so they don't feel as invested. And I'm not, so I haven't interviewed any of the CROs that are using the preferred provider models. And so I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on their motives, right? All I'm saying is that was the feedback I received. There was a perception on the sponsor side. And so it didn't feel like it was serving them well. And that was pretty universal. Like I didn't hear a single person defending the preferred provider model saying the thing as I love about it is it provides good value. They were poking holes in everything. Even the notion that one of its strengths being it provides value because you get like volume discounts, right? That perceived savings was negated by the amount of time people were spending doing change orders, and they felt like they were getting change ordered to death and that there was no effective savings at that point.
Would love to, get a chance to look at that article once it's published, because I think that's going to be interesting data for the industry to look at, because this is going to be what direct feedback from boots on the ground, actually people dealing with this day to day. And that could lead to probably, as you're suggesting, a shift in the mindset of, how the operating model is been structured right now and has been for the last couple of years in terms of outsource everything to the CRO and then let them drive it, but then have a costing model where you reap the benefits from a preferred provider, but have to build up internal expertise to deal with changes in scope. So it's a very interesting model. But as you've been in the industry for so long, I mean, what are the key three challenges that you have encountered or that you feel we haven't addressed as much? Feedback from different stakeholders. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think one of the biggest challenges we've talked about when I've talked to sponsors is there's a lot of concern over team turnover, team engagement, and just being able to get studies completed. I think with enrollment, that has been a number one concern. Folks it can really delay your program. And a lot of those enrollment expectations are based off of initial feasibility estimates that end up being inaccurate. And that creates a lot of friction between the sponsors and their service providers. So I think those are things I've really seen as common theme recently.
Just one thing I wanted to mention, and recently I went through a RFP process with one of our clients where I was consulting, and we are trying to bring in a CRO in. And the question always posed is about, what kind of sites the CRO is going to work with, and can you give us enrollment numbers? And this is a trade-off for CROs, right? They are not doing a full feasibility. I mean,
Mhm.
most of these initial bid defenses are focused more or structured around a lean protocol synopsis with changes as the protocol evolves until a final protocol is available. It's difficult to have CROs provide you with bids that look closer to what the overall cost would be for the budget to run that study. And in the mix of that, you tend to ask them or pose them the question about giving you enrollment numbers or the sites that they'll be working with. Most of the CROs don't technically go out and perform a full-fledged feasibility for these numbers. They pick up numbers from historic backgrounds or their experiences working with the sites or just a phone call with the site to understand what the patient pool looks like. So that's been a challenge. I don't know if you feel the same way from a site perspective, that sometimes sites are not engaged at the right time to get numbers, and then both sponsors and CROs then go back to sites calling them saying, when can you put the enrollment, or when can you enroll patients? And that somehow, that whole circle doesn't make sense to me, because CROs are not paid for the feasibility, so they don't perform the feasibility in depth. They provide sponsors with numbers that they feel might be close to what the site has given them. And the sites haven't seen the protocol in full, so they cannot commit to the numbers that they will be able to enroll. So I feel like it's a cycle. And then sponsors feel betrayed that CROs haven't provided them the correct estimation for enrollment. CROs justify that we didn't do a feasibility, so we don't know. This is based on our initial interaction with the site. And sites go back and say, we didn't receive the protocol, so we can't commit to numbers. So I don't know what you feel about this whole cycle, but love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. So I deal with a lot of small biotechs, and a lot of times it can be very small. And if you have like 2 to 10 people, you might not necessarily have someone who has a lot of clinical experience, or maybe you have one team member that does. And the rest of the folks are they're physicians and scientists, and they know the area, but that's not what clinical development's about. And so I think there's a disconnect. And so if you go to the CRO, you're like, well, I know we're going to need help running the trial, so we're going to service providers, but you might not know how to put in all those smaller in between steps. One of which I really do think I would encourage sponsors to spend a little bit of money, like vetting CROs to do feasibility. Don't, before you go for your full RFP, say I'm going to get 5 CROs to do an RFP just for feasibility. And that's actually pretty inexpensive. And you're paying CROs for what they're doing, but compared to your full RFP, it's going to be like peanuts. But really give you a better idea. And I would say really engage with them during that work. Don't just say give me that number by the end of the week. But hopefully, as a small biotech, you've been engaging with patient advocacy groups and getting their input on stuff like this as well. I've also talked with several people who have had really good strategies with getting those kind of early feasibilities from boutique CROs. Even if you don't think that CRO can you do your full study for, it's international for reasons like cancer study, they're just not going to have the bandwidth to do it. But they often know the space very well and they're super engaged with those sites because it's all they do. If you're we're just doing only ophthalmology or something, all those ophthalmology sites inside and out, and you have relationships with them, and you've seen a lot of protocols come through. So I think really getting those numbers, pressure testing them against, you can do an analysis on what's in clinicaltrials.gov. I mean, you can just download that data and look for completed studies, when it started, when it completed, how many sites it was, and how many patients they got. And you could do kind of that data can be a little bit funny, but it can give you sort of a second way to pressure test it. Are these things lining up? Where are the outliers, right? I think doing that upfront work to really fully vet what your enrollment rate is going to be, patients per site per month, really helps you. It prevents you from having protocol amendments down the road if you really get that right the first time.
No, that's well said. The other element I wanted to bring up and love to get your thoughts on is biotech companies these days are very low on runway and cash, but at the same time they want to continue, not halt their clinical development, because the next tranche of funding is going to be dependent on what the data looks like. In those cases, I've seen many a times that the feasibility might not be feasible, or paying upfront for feasibility might not be feasible, in which case they have to rely on some of the enrollment numbers or projections that the CROs provide. But then I feel at the back end, they should be ready for, tweaks in those numbers, because once the CROs go out actively to really look at or interact more with the sites is when the actual numbers come up. But the challenge is always about, we want to enroll in 6 months. We don't want to go more than 2 sites. And, it's a trade-off. Like, you want to enroll 30 patients from 2 sites, and you don't have a good hang of what the enrollment rate is going to be. That is always a trade-off. And I think sometimes sponsors fail to appreciate the fact that a robust feasibility was not performed to really get the actual numbers. Because again, feasibility, as you suggested, will have that initial cost impact. And sometimes some sponsors are not ready to bear that. Any thoughts there? Do you think the assessment makes sense, or is this, it's again like a circle, like, everybody's dependent?
Definitely seen that. And I think that there's a lot of times when I've seen that play out, it's sort of a top-down approach, and the sponsor company, as you said, cash runways are finite and money's precious. And so you think about it in those terms, and they don't want to spend the money necessarily on feasibility because, like, we got to go, we got to be conserve our cash. My pushback on that is, and there was a recent analysis done on protocol amendments, and it costs about $500,000 to implement a protocol amendment. Like, you just think about like the time spent at sites and like hours, and that's not even including the analysis of like, if you are late to market, like what's that going to cost you in real dollars, right? So that's discounting that. And it usually takes, according to most recent analysis, like about 5 to 6 months to implement the protocol amendment. And that's way up, because like at the beginning of the 2000s, it was more like 3 to 4 months. It's really increased. Know what the reason for that is. What I'm saying is, if you're saying like, I don't have the money to do feasibility up front, I'm like, well, I hope you have $500,000 later on, because we might need it for a protocol amendment. So if your feasibility analysis costs you less than $500,000, and I assure you it will, then maybe kind of rethink your analysis and how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, and again, I think I've gone through this over and over again with different sponsors on, trying to enroll quickly, but at the same time, not having the right stakeholders from the get-go. What I mean by that is, early stage biotech companies, as I said, they have a lean model, they have just a C-suite, they have a dev person come in, but somebody who hasn't been experienced enough in driving operational activities, and a medical person who has not worked on building protocols in the past might have a good understanding of the disease state, but sometimes they cannot visualize how operationally or feasible a protocol might be, which is where all the amendments come in as you start implementing the protocol. And that's where I think, and having an experienced team does make sense. And that's where I think the team of consultants that can come in to really drive would really add value.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I know it's not something that just Park Clinical does. I mean, you have tremendous experience in consulting as well. And I think the consulting umbrella is always a trade-off between, like, are you going to operate day-to-day activities, which falls under more of a contracting, versus consulting is more about understanding your strategy, making recommendations, and also implementing those recommendations.
Yeah,
But I think more and more sponsors have started probably, understanding the value of consulting versus trying to bring them on board to fill a position. I don't know, Matt, any thoughts there? What has been your experience so far?
I think that's right, Sid. And it is hard for small sponsors, because when you're really small, it's like you can be a real expert in multiple dimensions, but you can't know everything, and you don't know what you don't know. And that's why it's easy to kind of rely on your own biases. And that can sometimes get you off on the wrong track. But having people who are really strong operationally and that understand, they've run a lot of trials and they understand like what the pitfalls are, that adds a lot of value. To me, there's a lot of small sponsors that they'll add, data management and medical, and those are super value to add. But I'd say the two things that they should really think about up front before they're even in the clinic is get a regulatory strategist. That is like number one.
Well,
And then
yeah,
get someone who's an operations person. And you can do it with consultants, and that's pretty cost effective because you're not bringing out a full-time employee. But get someone you trust, and really fully pressure test things so you can optimize your timelines.
no, absolutely. That's very well said. And that's something we do at Park Clinical as well. We support regulatory clinical development strategy as well. I mean, you have You have been interacting with us for a while now, which is exciting to see. And I'm sure we'll get a chance to work together again, as
Hopefully so.
as we did in the past. But again, just poking your brain a little bit on the protocol optimization piece. What are your thoughts on like how we can optimize a protocol where we can avoid amendments? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that the number one protocol amendment that you see is really around updating the trial size, right? Because we need more sites and we
Yeah.
guessed on that. And there's a lot of just general feasibility things that can help with that. But really, I think we don't spend enough time in general pressure testing protocols, doing a quality by design approach where you're talking to other experts that are not necessarily involved in your program. And this includes patients, it includes physicians, it includes other medical writers, right, that don't know your data and aren't bringing those biases into their analysis. They're just reading it for content. And sometimes, and this is a human nature, that you can read something and your brain's filling in gaps because you kind of like, I know what that means. But if someone's fresh to it, they're going to find those holes and say, is this clear? Is this not clear? And that provides tremendous value. And to be fair, this takes time up front. And my experience working in biotech is there's always time pressures because look, we've told our investors or we've told the street that we're going to be in the clinic by November and we've got to nail that. And so, you got to hurry up and do it. And then when you're like, well, we want to vet it with these people, it's like, we don't have time. We have to hit this milestone. And those pressures are real. I'm not discounting that. But I will say that in general, I would advocate really focusing on a quality by design approach, really fully vetting these things to make sure that everything is crystal clear, that you don't have any selection criteria that are going to exclude patients sort of incidentally. I think that, and I'm not to go off on another tangent here, but I think that there's a lot of selection criteria. You say, here are the key selection criteria. You go to your sites and say, how many of these patients can you get? And they're like, oh, I can get like 5 a month. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But then when you give them the full selection criteria, they're like, oh, well, but this thing down here, I didn't realize that was going to exclude patients. That's 50% of my patients right there, gone. Didn't tell you that up front because they just didn't know. So having that visibility and really developing those relationships, those conversations take longer. I mean, that's real. If you want to do quality, it's the quality, speed, cost triangle, right? And so everyone's like, speed and cost, let's go, buddy. But yeah, don't discount quality because it'll actually save you time in the long run.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. That goes back to your suggestion about doing a very robust feasibility very early to really set you up for success.
Yeah.
And I think that's a true message that we can take away from this conversation. Again, this impacts your protocols and then those impact costs. So it's like doing the right thing, as you said, quality by design from the get-go is going to have an upstream impact that's eventually improve the quality of the trial, save cost on a long run.
Yeah.
And these days extend runways for companies, so you can do a lot more with less. But man, as you've evolved in your career, like would love to hear about some of the challenges that you've faced coming up in your career and how did you deal with them. So
With
would love
enrollment specifically,
no, your overall career.
it's a big box. I don't even know where to start with that, Sid. I think, maybe keeping with the theme of enrollment, and I will say this, my opinions today are based on mistakes I have made in the past, and as well as mistakes I've seen other people make, right? And I have had protocols that have had like 4+ amendments, protocols that I wrote earlier in my career. And at the time, I was like, oh, I think this is like solid. We had internal people review it, it was all set. And then I realized it was like, wow, this was not nearly as clear or precise as I thought. And it's so funny when you get feedback from the sites. It's like, yeah, this is just messing us up. Yeah, we can't enroll this. And it's like, man, and no one thought to ask. And all the internal people we had, no one thought to ask. It's like, now have you checked this for the sites? They're going to be able to do this, right? No one asked that question. And so that really informs my current opinion. And it's funny when I see people still falling into those same traps. The ICH just released the new guideline that includes the quality by design approach. And you'd think that we all be like, everyone says, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, that's excellent. We love that. but I'm not seeing it in day-to-day practice for the most part. And I think I still see that as a huge challenge. It's a huge pitfall, something that I've seen in my career. And the only way you can do it really is to build that culture of quality from the get-go, to start and say, like, this is what we're about as a company.
Oh, that's great. Again, I think we're about 25 minutes into this conversation. Time just flew by. But I appreciate your time, Matt. I think great conversation on some of the challenges that we are seeing in the industry. Look forward to the article that you'll be publishing. Love to get that data to better understand like where we need to make a switch or where we need to make tweaks to make the whole process of managing clinical studies better. But again, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to put the link to your LinkedIn profile in the description where this video will be posted on YouTube. Anybody who was interested to get in touch with Matt, please feel free to do so through LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to both of us. We'll have both our links in the details. Again, thank you so much everyone for watching and on this episode. Matt, thanks again.
Thank you. It's been a delight.